Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer Dave Matter. Dave, looking forward to the future for Missouri football. If you're in charge, what are some of the changes you think they need to make to bounce back from a 5-7 season?
Well, I think you look at the offense first, and if you look at Texas A&M, they run a very similar offense to Missouri. Does that validate the spread in the SEC? Well, in theory, maybe, but Missouri doesn't have what Texas A&M has, especially offensive tackle and the quarterback position, where they have a guy that can run around and make something out of nothing. And James Franklin just isn't that mobile of a guy, at least not for the situation for next year. Maybe Matty Mock is, maybe one of these freshmen that are coming in can do that, can run this style. But I think for the immediate future, you don't necessarily have the talent that can work in a system like Missouri tried this year, like Texas A&M does. Otherwise, if you take the tackles and the quarterback off A&M's roster, I don't think they're much better than Missouri. I think the talent is pretty similar, but they have some great players in those positions that make that system work. Missouri doesn't, so I think you need to go to a pretty more versatile offense. Things that we saw parts of this year when they used extra blockers to help with that offensive line, when they went to two backs in the backfield. I think more of that, to where that isn't just a foreign thing that you're kind of messing with, where it's a little bit more of your base offense. I think you start there and give that quarterback some more protection back there.
Yeah, I don't think you should switch from the spread. I think if you were to switch to a pro-style offense, you would be setting yourself back years. I mean,
right.
You would be setting yourself up for some years that it would be too many bad years for Pinkel to survive. So they're not going to change that part. But I do think you see a lot of spread teams that, they always have a back in the backfield, basically, and they have running plays where the guy's not going in motion from the slot and running 20 yards sideways. I mean, they hit the line of scrimmage, which I think Missouri needs to do because they're not as fast as these guys are up against.
Right.
And if you're not an empty backfield, you're not isolating these linemen who, in the first place, are not as athletic as the people they're trying to block. And in the second place, if they're hurt, they're doubly worse. Half the season, Elvis Fisher could barely move, but you had to have him out there because you didn't have anybody better. So I think if you have to go into the year realizing that, the offensive linemen that you have, you be realistic about it. Can they block Jarvis Jones and Jadeveon Clowney? No. Well, you better help them. It doesn't do much good to have five guys out in the pattern because I don't think Missouri's quarterbacks know this offense well enough or savvy enough to look at the defense and before the ball is snapped, know exactly where they want to go with it and get rid of it fast enough.
Right.
And that contributed, I think, to some of the injury problems there. Now let's move on to another topic, which Gary Pinkel says he's not going to make any changes in, and that is staff changes. Do you feel like that is a wise move?
Well, if you're Gary Pinkel going into the 2013 season, I think you're probably on one of the hotter seats in the country. Are you going to find a good coordinator or a good position coach that's going to want to join this staff? I don't know. So I think it might be slim pickings out there unless you just want to find somebody on one of these SEC staffs that lost their job and is looking for work. Then you have to ask yourself, is that really better than getting rid of somebody who knows the system? This is at least how Pinkel, I think, is approaching this, not necessarily myself. But you want to start fresh with somebody new. I don't know if that's worth it, but I do think there are probably some guys on the staff that have been around long enough to where maybe shaking things up a little bit will maybe give you a boost in recruiting. Just getting some new life to the staff. I thought when they added Josh Henson a couple of years ago, that gave them a new voice, a new outlook on things. He came from outside of the Pinkel bubble, and I think that's been good for the staff. He's the only guy on the staff that knows the SEC, having coached at LSU. That's not why they hired him, but it's helped them in the long run. So, I think there would be some advantages to doing that, but I also see what Gary Pinkel is kind of set in his ways, and Mike Alden gives him the freedom to handle his staff the way he does, that you sort of kind of saw this coming, despite a lot of rumors out there that he was going to, clean house or at least add a few different coaches. But that's just kind of his track record.
The one thing I think I would do if I were him is keep an open mind about who is available or who would be interested in coming. Who would be interested in coming to a place where the coach might be on the hot seat? Someone who doesn't have a job now. And there's 4 schools in the SEC that have fired their coaches. Missouri was the only team to not make a bowl that didn't fire their coach, actually. So there's a lot of guys out there that, they came from losing staffs, but maybe they're a pretty good recruiter. Maybe they have good ties. I think I would look at that, and then I would look at my own staff and say, is there someone or some ones on this staff that are not pulling their weight on the recruiting trail? And if so, then, it's not personal like you said today, but I think, you have to, if you're blindly loyal to these guys and they're not getting the job done, then you're all going to be out of a job soon enough. So that would be one thing I would look at, and I can't sit here and say who deserves to be fired or not. But if you look at your own roster and you say, this coach or these coaches don't seem to be getting many players, then I think sure you look around and see if there's someone better.
Also, I wonder,
it's very common in basketball to do that. You've always,
absolutely.
You usually have 2 of the 4 guys on your staff are basically just recruiters.
Right, and also in the SEC, you see a lot more staff turnover. A lot of it is, too, the coordinators in the SEC at high-profile schools are getting head coaching jobs and moving on, so you're kind of forced to replenish the staff. That happens at Alabama a lot. It used to happen in Oklahoma all the time. That isn't really happening at Missouri, so that's a different angle of things. Also, too, with Gary, how far is he looking down the future? If he is thinking about coaching next year and maybe not much longer, is it really his incentive to just go out and hire a recruiter? Because if you bring in a recruiter in December, how much is he really going to help you? Is he going to find some freshmen that are going to make an impact next year? I don't know. So maybe he has to balance that a little bit too. It's a tough call. Everyone wants change. I do sort of respect the guy for saying I'm not going to make change just because the fans on Tiger Board want me to, get rid of a guy that's been here for 17 years. But when you are sort of on a downward slide a little bit, I think there can be, some positive things from changing things up a little bit.
And then I think maybe lastly is that Pinkel just has to look at himself, and is he the same energetic guy he once was? Is he instilling the same discipline in his team that he did when he first showed up here? I don't know. It's hard to get a sense of that, especially coming off a losing season because everybody's down the dumps when they're losing. Is it because of, he's had a rough spell in his personal life, or is it just because of the losing? I don't know what you feel about that. Do you feel like he's still bringing the same passion that he once did?
Just from our perspective, watching him on the sidelines of games, he's never a very animated guy. And even when they were winning in a lot of games, he usually had the same demeanor. I did think the A&M game, he was decidedly different. It just looked like he had about as much interest being there as the players did. But it's also, again, I think the losing wears on you. And when you're generally not used to having losing seasons, I think that wears on you. The personal life stuff, it's easy to say that that's affecting him and the team in a year when they're losing. But if this stuff is going on in 2007, we'd be saying, oh gosh, he's so tough for being resilient and not letting that stuff bother him. So I think it all just comes with what's going on in the field. Is it affecting the players, the outside stuff? I don't really think so. But it makes for a good story, or it makes for at least an excuse or an alibi for people that are looking for explanations right now.
And maybe it was just the youth of the team, but it seemed like this year, early in his career, the hallmarks of his team was just not many penalties, always were plus in the turnover category. Just sort of looked like a well-coached team, regardless of whether they're the more talented team or not. I didn't necessarily get that sense this year. It was like you'd watch, and some of the same problems they had in the opener, they still had the last game. I mean, they couldn't snap the ball. They couldn't kick an extra point. Penalties at times were a problem. The Syracuse game, penalties were a big problem. There were certain things where you're watching it, you're like, I do not get the feeling I'm watching a real well-coached team. And I just wonder if, is he, I don't know, after 12 years, do you get a little comfortable, and do you need a little wake-up call like this to maybe go back and look at, well, how did I do this when I first got here that I sort of had better control over these guys?
Yeah, I think some of those small things are troubling because they add up, and I think it contributed some of it, maybe not to a loss, but at least it put the team in a bad situation in some of those games. And listening to him on his coach's show, on his radio show Monday night, and then his press conference Tuesday, he did come off a little more spirited, a little more animated, and you think, okay, well, that's good that he is now, but where was that during the year? Is he just looking at this like, okay, this one's over with, it's a mulligan, we'll start over next year and bring that fire back? I don't know. I mean, it's why now and not during the year? It's really interesting. We'll see what this spring is like. I got a feeling that he is going to have more of that personality that maybe he had this week once he realized that things maybe weren't as secure as he thought they were.
All right. Well, Dave, get some sleep. We'll talk again right before spring practice.